If you ever find yourself in the quaint little area of Austrått in Norway, possibly golfing at the local course, you might notice something interesting: a turret from a battleship. It's quite the interesting piece, having three 28 centimeter guns, providing protection from any invading forces trying to make their way to Trondheim. But the Norwegians weren't the ones who placed the guns there. It was the occupying German forces during the Second World War. The battleship turret was not an extra turret the Germans had lying around. No, it's turret Caesar, that is, the rearmost turret of the battleship Gneisenau. If you're like me, a naval history nerd, and I imagine you are since you're watching this video, it begs the question, why is that turret there and what happened to the German battleship Gneisenau? In today's video, we'll answer those questions and cover the destruction of the battleship Gneisenau. Just so we have a bit of background, the battleship was one of the first German battleships built after the First World War, being armed with 9 28 centimeter or 11-inch guns, a top speed of over 30 knots, and armor comparable to most battleships of the time. Her and her sister Scharnhorst were certainly formidable, at least on paper. We've delved into their operational history in the past, and rather weak performance of those 11-inch guns, even when fighting British battlecruisers, or completely avoiding British battleships when convoy raiding. But that's not what this video is meant for. The battleships entered service just before the Second World War, and through a series of different circumstances, ended up in the port city of Brest in 1942. We're going to pick up our story as she, her sister Scharnhorst, and the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen were in the process of completing Operation Cerberus in early 1942, or more famously known as the Channel Dash, where the British made many attempts to stop the ships from traversing the English Channel via land, air, and sea, which for a majority of them weren't successful. The British did find success with their efforts to mine the path the ships were taking, as both Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were hit. An underwater wreck caused further damage to Gneisenau. Though damaged, she was able to make it to Bloemsbutte, where she anchored for a few hours in company with Prinz Eugen, then sailing for the Kiel Canal and onto the Deutsche Werke shipyard in Kiel. This is where information starts to differ about the ship. Some sources, like battleships of the Scharnhorst class, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, the backbone of the German surface forces at the outbreak of war by Gerhard Koop and Klaus-Peter Schmolke, have this to say. On February 13th, Gneisenau passed through the Kiel Canal and went immediately into dry dock at the Deutsche Werke. Kriegsmarine standing orders prescribed that before a shipyard layup or entering dry dock, a warship must discharge her stock of ammunition, but for reasons that have never been explained, Gneisenau went into dry dock with her shell rooms and powder magazines full. Less than 2 weeks later, this error would prove fatal. Presumably, the original purpose of the dry docking was merely to allow for a survey of the mine damage before the ship was transferred to Gottenhofen for full repairs. Other sources claimed that she had been restocked, repaired, and scheduled for a deployment to Norway in early March 1942, as in Scharnhorst and Gneisenau by Daniel Knowles. Whatever the case may be, the fact remains that the ship had ammunition aboard on the night of February 26th, when overhead came 49 RAF bombers that attacked the battleship in dry dock. She suffered only a single hit that struck the forecastle and penetrated the upper and battery decks, which detonated against the armored deck. This explosion caused a chain reaction in the magazine below A turret. It ignited the powder in the shell cases for the ready-use ammunition. The powder went up in a great jet of flame, and the excess pressure from this lifted A turret and tossed it to the side. All members of the turret's crew were killed, and the final death toll was 112. A catastrophic explosion was avoided only by the immediate flooding of the shell rooms and magazines. The damage to the ship was pretty severe, with the front of the ship being burnt out. Because of that, it was decided that the ship was to be rebuilt and altered, namely replacing the existing 9 28 centimeter or 11-inch guns with 6 38 centimeter or 15-inch guns. Something that had been discussed and planned previously before the start of the Second World War, where Knowles writes, "The extensive damage that was sustained by the Gneisenau from the explosion of the forward turret convinced Oberkommando der Marine to rebuild the Gneisenau to mount 6 15-inch guns as had been originally planned, as opposed to simply repairing the ship. Due to the circumstances of the war, it dictated that the repair and rebuilding process could not be carried out at Kiel, as if you've seen my last video in this series, Kiel wasn't the safest place. Instead, the Kriegsmarine decided that the ship should be moved to Gottenhofen to complete the work, where she arrived on April 4th under her own steam, escorted by the pre-dreadnought Schlesien, serving as a cadet training vessel in the icebreaker Castor on account of the Baltic being partially frozen at the time. The ship was decommissioned on July 1st, and after that, the rebuilding work began arming her with those 15-inch guns and 3 twin turrets. However, the project was shelved in the early stages of January 1943 as Hitler ordered the cessation of all repair and conversion work. The reason for this was because of the disastrous Battle of the Barents Seas, where the Lutzow and the Admiral Hipper, in company with destroyers, were to attack Allied convoy JW.51B. Due to several factors including weather, the disposition of the German force, poor wording of the operational orders, and of course the enemy escorts, resulted in a defeat for the German forces, including the destruction of the destroyer Friedrich Eckholt, heavy damage to the Admiral Hipper, and no Allied merchant vessels sunk. On January 6, 1943, a meeting was called at Führer HQ to justify Hitler's orders, to decommission all heavy units and the cessation of all repairs and conversion work. In his rage, Hitler described the heavy ships as worthless and useless. The order resulted in the resignation of Admiral Erich Schrader, who was replaced by Admiral Karl Dönitz, who got the order partially rescinded. However, the order for the cessation of all repair and conversion work still stood, which, taking from Knowles again, in the wake of this decision, Gneisenau was disarmed and used for spare parts. Reusable parts of the ship were scavenged and used to repair and keep the remaining elements of the Kriegsmarine surface assets operational. One such example being the removal of oil pumps, which were sent to Norway to be fitted to the damaged Tirpitz in early 1944. Subsequently, the guns of the battleship were removed piecemeal for inclusion in coastal batteries. The 2 surviving triple 11-inch mounts were placed at Bergen and Trondheim in Norway. First, to mount turret B near Bergen, it was necessary to dig around 50 feet vertically into the mountainside. This was considered too time-consuming. A depression in the ground was found instead, and concrete was poured to create a position where the turret could sit. Once the 1,000-pound turret was positioned and fired its first full salvo, it flattened barns in the local area. It is worth noting that some Norwegian prisoners were used in the construction of the turret's new housing. On the other hand, for turret C near Trondheim, she went to form the Austrått fortress. Again, prisoners were used in the construction, cutting bunkers and tunnels into the hillside to fit and serve the turret. By August 1943, the turret was in place, where it remains till today, being decommissioned in 1968, remaining in a good state of preservation. You can go visit it if you find yourself in the area. Link in the description. It's interesting to note that parts of turret A were placed in coastal defenses as well. It's also interesting to note that the remaining 5.9-inch guns were placed in positions in the Netherlands and Denmark. Following the war, the Danes reused the guns to try to help defend against the Soviet naval forces in the Baltic, and with the end of the Cold War, the fort they were in lost strategic importance. Today, you can visit those 5.9-inch guns in Stens Fort. There were proposals for 4 of the 6 15-inch guns that were ready for the Gneisenau to be placed in fortifications in Denmark, but nothing came of it. The hulk of the ship was used as a store ship in Gottenhofen, or today what is Gdynia, and frequently used as an air raid bunker on account of the armor, along with other purposes. Nothing of mention occurred in 1944, as the hulk was laid up in Gottenhofen. In late March 1945, the hulk was towed out into the harbor entrance and scuttled as a block ship as the Red Army advanced on the city. To wrap things up, this is what Knowles has to say. The hull of the Gneisenau remained in Gottenhofen until the end of the war. As the Red Army advanced on the city, the remains of the ship were taken out into the entrance of the harbor and scuttled as a block ship on March 27, 1945. The following day, the city fell to Soviet forces and was assigned to local Polish authorities, who renamed the city Gdynia. In 1947, the Polish government ordered that the remains of the Gneisenau be removed from the harbor entrance, prompting salvage operations to begin. The hull was scaled and refloated on September 12, 1951, before being towed away to be scrapped. It is believed that some of the steel from the Gneisenau was subsequently used in the construction of Polish merchant vessels. When she was refloated on September 12, 1951, the Gneisenau was the largest ship to ever be raised. So, there you have it, folks. We answered those questions from the beginning of the video. There was actually a lot more of the battleship left than I initially thought. We've also covered a number of other German wrecks on this channel. We've covered the Prinz Eugen and the Admiral Scheer. Let me know what other German ships or ships in general you'd like me to cover. Thank you all so much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe as it'll help the channel to grow. Until next time, my friends, have an amazing week.